Welcome back. Again, we're continuing with our apologetics type study. And again, we've been talking about a lot of different things. And last week, we really talked about theistic evolution. Is it even possible for deep time macro evolution? Just to even further define it, is it compatible with the biblical view of creation? And I think last week, especially going into scripture, we found that that's just not the case. And it doesn't surprise us, I don't think, to find that these two are incompatible, because deep time evolution in the conventional paradigm, that is an answer for a world without God. It just is. So why would that be compatible with the story we get from God? Makes sense that it's not. So now that we have really only two paradigms we're looking at, not a mixture of the two, but the two, one of the biggest things that we have to look at and really have to understand is deep time. Because again, once we get into evolution of, biological beings such as ourselves and other animals and plants and things of that nature, for that to even be possible, you've got to have a whole lot of time. So how do we get that time? How do we get that deep time that everybody talks about, millions and billions of years? Well, that's what we're going to discuss today. We're going to get into that today. And I know I've been saying we're going to have to put our lab coats on today. This one, we're really going to have to put our lab coats on today. We're going to be talking about some things you may have never heard before. Don't get too scared. Promise it's not going to be crazy in-depth stuff. We're not going to get into any mathematical equations, but for us to understand how they get these numbers, we really do have to get into the processes used by scientists and define limits and where assumptions are inserted that may have skewed these numbers. That's really important. So we're going to play a little portion of this film. Again, we've been watching little sections of Genesis's history, or is Genesis history. And who we're fixing to watch, I actually looked into a lot of his work, and a lot of my PowerPoint, a lot of the things that I'm going to show you today is based off his work. He's done an incredible amount of work in geology, and he's had some major discoveries that have really shed light on radiometric dating and the age of rocks. So you're good to play it. May need to be just a little louder.
You see the quietness, the expanse, nothing to disturb you. Yet you've got the reminder that it was explosive in the past. There was this volcano back here, the Cinder volcano, and it belched out this lava flow that spilled out across this countryside.
Just a huge amount of basalt, lava.
Yeah, but it's actually small compared to the lava flows that we see in many places. And there's something like 1,000 of these volcanoes around here. And the little one behind us here, we call that a cinder cone volcano.
You call that a little one?
Yeah, well, it is. I mean, these volcanoes are small. Mount St. Helens, 1980, when it erupted, okay? The top 2,500 feet of the volcano blew off, but that was small compared to historical eruptions. We can go back a little bit further to the Great Yellowstone eruption, and some of the volcanic ash was down in Texas. It blew that far away. You think about lava flows in India, that you have an accumulation of up to 1,000 feet over an area a third of the size of the subcontinent of India. What we see in the present is really only minuscule by comparison to what we've seen in the past. And that's telling us something about the historic past. We can't use present day rates of these processes to understand how quickly and how majestically in terms of scale the geological record accumulated.
Well, that is the point that has brought me to you, because how do we determine the age of these rocks?
Well, the important first thing is to recognize that this lava flow is, in a sense, an instant in time. It's an event. And when it's molten, you've got all the different elements that have come out of the volcano are all mixed up, and the rock starts to crystallize. Any of those atoms that are radioactive, they now start to accumulate what we call the daughter products, the decay products. Now, the point is that this rate of decay is so slow, when we measure it in the present, that, it takes millions of years for parent atoms to decay to daughter atoms. And so that's ultimately where the millions of years come from, the fact that the decay rates in the present are slow.
But we would say that the present is not really the key to the past, because obviously the past holds some massive, massive catastrophic events that are not going on today.
In fact, the Bible would say that the past is the key to the present. If you want to understand why the way the world is today, you've got to understand what happened in the past. So we've got lots of hints that geological processes haven't been at constant rates through time. And we have other hints that the decay rates may not have been constant. See, we've taken rock samples from a number of places, lots of samples in the Grand Canyon of each of these rock layers. I've done it in New Zealand. We've done it in other parts of the world. And what we've done is we've submitted the same samples to more than one of these dating methods. And so what we found is on the same samples with more than one method, we were getting ages that were different by hundreds of millions of years or even a billion years in some instances. We're seeing huge differences by using different methods.
Well, if there is that kind of a difference between all of these dating methods, then that would seem to confirm the fact that we have an open system here, not a closed one.
And if we have an open system, that means we can't trust it to give us dependable dates for these rocks. And that changes the whole thinking about the history of the Earth, because suddenly now these radioactive clocks are not reliable. We've got evidence that rates were faster in the past. Suddenly, we may not be thinking in terms of millions of years. We may be thinking in terms of a history that is much shorter.
But you were saying that this kind of evidence is in the open literature now.
Yes.
Why is it not making an impact?
Well, I've been asked that when I've spoken in university geology departments. And the answer is because there is a commitment to the millions of years. And so once people get locked into that focus, anything outside their field of view that conflicts with that focus is marginalized. And the reason why the millions of years are important, if we go back in the history of scientific thought, Charles Lyell in England proposed millions of years and they multiplied the ages for the rocks. And that was the foundation on which Charles Darwin built. In fact, he read Charles Lyell's book and was convinced of the millions of years of geological evolution, so he could say, now, given enough time, what we don't see happening in the present. We might only see small changes in the present. Given millions of years, the small changes can add up to big changes. And so if you want to have a way of looking at the history that says that we got here by chance, random processes over millions of years, then you've got to have rocks that are millions of years old. Otherwise, you've undermined that whole foundation of that view of Earth history.
So time becomes the critical element for the conventional paradigm.
Exactly.
And that time has to be deep time. Andrew said when you study the rock formations, they show evidence of a young Earth transformed by a global catastrophe. So he took me south to Sedona to see it for myself.
The important thing to note is that this landscape is actually very stable. There was lots of erosion in the past to carve out this whole terrain, but those cliffs and the valley floor are very stable, which is why you've got the vegetation. Today, everything's much quieter. Today's processes are extremely slow, but they can't explain how we got this erosion, how we got these layers, how we got these cliffs.
All right, so you wanted to come here because you see evidence of a young Earth because of what's here. What do you see?
Yes, well, the first thing we notice is the extent of these layers. It's like a stack of pancakes. For example, the red unit that goes all the way across our field of view, that's the Schneebler Hill Formation. And above that, you can see the first white unit is the Kuykendall sandstone. And above that, you've got the Turaweep, and at the horizon, you've got the Kaibab limestone, which is the rim rock of the Grand Canyon. And, here we are, 70 more miles from the Grand Canyon, and these layers are still here.
Yeah. It's almost hard to imagine the volume of material that represents.
Yes, take the Kuykendall sandstone. We can trace it from here right across New Mexico, Colorado, right over towards Kansas and Oklahoma, or even in Texas. We're talking at least 200,000 square miles for this one rock unit that's consistent for mile after mile after mile. That's not the scale that we see today with localized sedimentation. And to get it flat lying like this over such a large area, it's like you have to make your pancake all at once very rapidly. And so these layers show evidence of rapid sedimentation, the extent of these layers.
Well, Andrew, you were talking about that red formation, but that doesn't sound familiar to me.
No, that's the Schnebler Hill Formation. It's not in the Grand Canyon. In the Grand Canyon, we go from the Kuykendall into the Hermit Formation. There's that knife edge boundary, and there's no evidence of erosion there, which means that the Hermit Formation was rapidly deposited, and then immediately the Kuykendall was a deposit on top of it. But here, we've come 70 miles from the Grand Canyon, and we've got this Schnebler Hill Formation between the Kuykendall and the Hermit. And this Schnebler Hill Formation, 800 to 1,000 feet thick, over an area of 1,000 square miles, had to have been formed very rapidly. If that took millions of years, we ought to see millions of years of evidence of millions of years erosion back in the Grand Canyon at that same boundary. We don't. So that means that this Schnebler Hill Formation in this area had to form in a matter of hours. So it tells you that not only is there a lack of erosion, but there's no time between those boundaries. So the whole sequence of layers was very rapidly deposited.
So we have this large extent of layers. We have the lack of erosion between the layers. What other evidence do you see?
Well, if we look closely, for example, at the Kuykendall sandstone, we see the bedding, that there's bands within it that are sloping. We call those cross beds. What they indicate is that you had underwater sand waves were moving along. The comparison is in a desert. It's important to recognise that there's a difference in the angle in a desert dune. It's usually 30 to 34 degrees of these sloping beds. Underwater, it's usually 25 degrees or less. And Dr. John Whitmore has combed the hills around here with his students, hundreds and hundreds of measurements of these cross beds. And they all come in the range of 15 to 25 degrees. So it was underwater deposition. And so these layers are accumulating in hours, weeks, and within months, you've got this whole stack of pancake layers over such wide areas.
So it isn't a difference in believing in those layers that exist.
Not at all.
It's the difference of time, isn't it?
Correct. It's not a question of science versus the Bible. When we're talking about the flood paradigm and the conventional paradigm, we're actually talking about two different views of Earth history.
Those views.
Thank you up there. We can go to the PowerPoint now. Thank you. All right. So obviously a lot was discussed right there. And again, while did a very good job explaining, it is really difficult to comprehend everything that was just said in a matter of 10 minutes. So we're going to go over a few things that was espoused a moment ago by Dr. Snelling. I always forget to turn that on. Okay, please work. Did I do that or did you do that up there? I'm not doing that. All right. Is this? Yeah, I'll just have to give you the thumbs up, I think. Oh, wait. Okay, it's working. Cool. Okay, so the question is, how old is the Earth, right? And I'm just going to go ahead and tell you, I don't have an age for you today, because if we're being completely honest, I think as scientists, you've got to give a very relative number. But the study that's been done can say that it's probably not this 4.5 billion year old age that's given by dating methods established over the years. And so, interestingly enough, the sun itself is 4.6 billion years old, and our galaxy, the Milky Way, is 13.6 billion years old by the conventional dating methods. So again, when we look at these things, these are some of the ages that are coming up with. The dinosaurs fall between 220 million years ago to 60 million years ago. That's really where they fall, at least again, by conventional methods. And so you heard him talk about radiometric dating, and that's really where these millions and billions of years come from. That's where it has to come from. That's where these more concrete dates are coming from. And so what radiometric dating is, as he discussed a little bit there, it's talking about parent isotopes or parent atoms that decay over time into daughter isotope atoms. Okay. So as you can see up here, I don't know if you can see it. This first rock up here with all those little yellow dots, that represents uranium. Okay. Uranium, this rock in the perfect world for them, only has uranium in them. That's the parent atom. Over time, because they're radioactive, that isotope, all that means is that they have a different number of neutrons in their nucleus. So they're not as stable. So they're not going to stay that way over time. They're going to actually decay over time into an isotope of lead. Lead 206, I believe. So that blue dot right there, it says PB in it, not PB and J, it's lead. Over time, given enough time, that uranium decays into lead. So what they've done by present day radioactive decay rates, they've calculated that in today, uranium will decay at such and such a rate. These rates are very, very slow. A lot of times they're unstable, but they're not so unstable, they're readily going to decay very quickly, okay? And so what they would do, say, take that rock sample, you've got equal parts of lead and uranium. Well, based on that decay rate, you can then determine, well, this rock, because it has this much lead, is this old based on the uranium decay rate. That makes sense, right? And look, I'll be honest with you, a lot of the math that goes into this is sound. And the decay rates that are established today are sound. I'm not trying to undermine any of that science. Again, I myself am a scientist. I'm not looking to undermine any science that doesn't need it. But there are some major assumptions that are in place that are problematic for this type of dating. Okay, first of all, the assumption that, and in the equation, there is a constant. It's called D0. Stands for daughter, and there's a 0. How did they come up with that constant? That means there are 0 daughter elements in this rock to begin with. They assume that uranium was there before lead was, and all the lead that we get, or at least the lead 206, only has come from that uranium. And again, there are other radioactive parent atoms that we test this way too. I say we, I don't test them. Scientists test. So that assumption has to be made. And that constant is put in there because that's an assumption that only makes this work. The implication is if they were there outside of that decay, well, then it blows all this up, because what's the source? Right? Now, that's assumption number 1. Assumption number 2 is that these rates have always been the same in the past. That's something that Dr. Snelling really kind of got into on the video a little bit, and I looked deeper into his research, and he has done some amazing research on this, and I want to share it with you. So here are some of the different radiometric dating types. So you've got, again, uranium-238 that goes into lead-206. Its half-life to decay is 4.5 billion, okay? Potassium to argon, 1.3. Rubidium to strontium, 48, which is a crazy. I think that's supposed to be million there, or there's a dot there that may be on me. That's a typo. I'm sorry. No, it's 48 billion. I remember that. And then samarium to neodymium, 106. So a whole long time. And that's, again, I've got to go look at and make sure that that was not million, because 106 billion, it wasn't here that long ago. But we know the dating ranges for each of these falls within around that 4.6 billion year range. Okay. And the reason that is because when we look at the date of the Earth and we look at the day of the sun, what they've calculated is around 4.6 billion. Okay. All of these can be used to date things within around 10 million up to 4.6 billion years old. Okay. These are most of these on here are the ones that are used. There is a few others. I didn't include them, but I can give those to you if you like. Now, here's the interesting thing, and this is the question that you got to ask. If these are reliable, accurate testing methods, should they not give you something that's consistent? If all of these have dating ranges between 10 million and 4.6, or, somewhere in the millions to 4.6 billion years, shouldn't they give you the same age? You would think, right? Well, Dr. Snelling, as he said in the video, I actually went and looked up some of the material that he submitted to these dating methods. And what's really interesting, I know this is too small for you to read, so I'll go ahead and go to this. This is actually a portion, and this is just a diagram to show you where he took these samples. These samples came from these areas. So when you look at, and this is actually out of the Grand Canyon, you see those layers up top. You're actually below those sedimentary layers. This is now getting into the bedrock, the igneous rock that was actually cooled and hardened lava and magma. So he took four samples out of four different, one sample out of each of these four different areas of this bedrock, and had them tested in each of these different types of dating methods. Okay. So that, and then these pictures are kind of where those samples came from. Now, I know it's still a small font and I could not get it any bigger. But basically what it says right up here, this is really interesting, that especially for the rubidium strontium on each of these areas, okay, you can see it's 1,100, basically 1.11 billion years. And they had it in millions of years. That's what the ages say right up here. So all of this is in millions. So that 1,100, it's actually 1.1 billion years. Okay. Now, you see the Bass Rapid debase sill, that sample, that second one, had a number for all of them. They were actually able to run that sample on all of them. Every single one of these dating methods gave back huge different date ages. Why did that happen? Okay, so for the potassium argon, 842 million years, whereas the uranium lead states 1.25 billion years. That's a big difference. It's a really big difference. And again, he sent these samples himself to these testing areas that do this type of testing, and these are their results. The question is, why do we see different ages? And he even says himself that it's not necessarily that their math is wrong. It's that these decay rates may not be the same in the past. So that these different things may have been decaying at faster rates under different circumstances. Like he said, I mean, when we saw the introduction of this section, he gets to looking at these cinder cone volcanoes and all this basalt lava that's been flowing out, basalt rock from lava flow. Things are different in the past. We don't have that information because we weren't there to historically record it correctly. The fact of the matter is that when we read in Genesis chapter 7, verse 11 and 12, the great fountains of the deep opened up and the flood rains came in. different portions of the sea bed and floor open up and actual magma comes through. Who's to say, and again, this was actually said in the first portion of the video, they believe that that's what happened. The crust opened up and to push all that water on land. Rainfall alone didn't flood the entire earth. Ocean actually was pushed up on land as well. There's some really catastrophic things happening around the flood time. And just another interesting note, I didn't put all the answers on here because honestly, we'd be here for 2 hours and we'd get into some pretty deep stuff. If you want that, I can get it to you. Talking about helium bleeding out of rocks and solar flares and neutrinos affecting the bonds of atoms as well. Well, if you want to get into that, you come talk to me. We won't get into that necessarily. But the fact of the matter is that these rates, there are good hints, as he called them, to say that these rates were not the same in the past. It's much like here's a great example. We take our last known growth rate. I'll be the example on this. My last known growth rate, not that I had much of a growth rate, it's okay. I'm short. I'm cool with it. Let's just say it was 1/4 of an inch in a year. Okay. That's what I know. Now, if I'm to calculate my age based off of my growth rate in a year, if I grow 1/4 of an inch in a year, I should be able to get my age, right? Well, I'm 67 inches tall. We do the math. I'm 268 years old. That's how long it would take me to grow at a growth rate of 1/4 of an inch per year to get to 67 inches. A lot of you are a lot taller than me. You must be 1,000 years old. But the fact of the matter is we actually do have a historical record of our life. In our past, we had different growth rates. We had growth spurts. We grew exponentially faster in the past, right? Well, we have that record. We don't have the record of the radioactive decay of these elements in the past. That's what we don't have. It's something that I'm going to leave you with. We won't bombard you too much with this, but this is something that I didn't quite know until I really dove into it when I first came to Chapel Hill to give this same talk. Anytime that you go and you ask about the layers within the Grand Canyon, there's couple million years that separate each of those different color of strata rock, correct? And remember when we had watched the first section, there was at where that non-conformity is, that first layer, 500 million years and then up. And it's separated by millions of years. Did you know that that's not tested by radiometric dating? Those millions of years are actually an extrapolation out of the igneous rock underneath all of it. None of those layers have ever been tested, and they cannot be tested by radiometric dating. All of those are assumed, and I'll call it by the name that it's called. It's relative dating. And if you go and you look up the relative dating definition, most of them will say hard, fast dates cannot be determined by relative dating. It uses fossils that are found within the sedimentary layers, although they can't be tested either radiometrically, which is interesting. You're basing your date off of a fossil, but then you're really basing the fossil's date off of igneous rock way below. Again, it almost gets into circular reasoning here. And then sedimentary layers are really based off of, again, like I said, these red layers you see here, those are the ones that can be tested radiometrically. Those are igneous layers like that. We don't see any of those in the Grand Canyon all the way down until the bedrock, that nonconformity. I know we've been talking about rocks a lot lately, but this is really where it all starts. Again, this allows scientists to believe that millions and billions of years can be possible in the past. However, if we look at this more objectively, look, if you think about it, they have to believe this. You have to. If you don't have God in your life, if you're not going to allow God to be a possibility, this is your only option. Why do you think they hold fast to that commitment? Because it's the only option, at least in their minds. However, if we come at this data with an open mind and say, look, both of these are possibilities, the data actually fits the creation paradigm much better than it does the conventional paradigm. At least it does to me. Now, I leave this as a segue to talk about fossils because we're going to get into fossils. We're kind of going from ground up, pun intended, and being literal, I guess. But we're going to look at the fossil record and talk about that as well and get into carbon-14. There's some really cool things about carbon-14. Y'all, everybody's kind of heard about carbon-14, right? Man. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So carbon-14 was really kind of the first dating that was done, and then it kind of got cast to the side. And now there's some interesting things that can be shown with carbon-14 that really show much younger ages than millions of years. Because based on half-lives, that carbon-14 does not have a very long half-life. It degrades pretty quickly in the grand scheme of things. 90,000 years, it's completely disintegrated. It's gone. It's decayed fully. So it shouldn't be in bones or diamonds that have formed over millions of years that haven't been exposed to the surface and atmosphere. Yet that's kind of what's been found. So that's kind of a teaser for next week. But we'll get into that. Are there any comments or questions? I know I've trying to drink out of a fire hydrant, throwing a lot at you here. Yep. Oh, so Dr. Snelling? Oh, yeah, no, he does not think that the Earth is billions of years old. No, he thinks much, much younger. Much younger. Like, and again, some people will say, I've heard him throw out the age 6,000. But again, you know, if it ended up being 10,000, okay, that's a way, way different age than millions of years. I mean, you're still hardly approaching 100,000 years at that point. So somewhere around, 10 and below is what I think he would say.
I get his school of thinking where things were doing things at a faster rate back then.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, it's kind of hard. If somebody were to just throw that out to me without kind of any proof.
Sure.
You know what I'm saying? So I feel like I get it, but because there's no historical background, it's really kind of a hard concept for me to try to be convinced of, I guess, versus everything else they've now shown data.
Sure.
You know what I'm saying?
No, I'm the same way.
Yeah.
I'm the same exact way. It's like, well, if I'm going to be critical of somebody just throwing in assumptions, why wouldn't I be critical of somebody also throwing in an assumption that's not backed? But, and I didn't cover necessarily all the stuff that the reasons why, because it gets down pretty deep, but there are many reasons. One of those, again, was that these dating methods, all of them don't give consistent ages. That's one thing. And that's really the major one I gave to you today. But helium bleeding, see, when uranium decays into lead, there are 8 helium atoms that are also a byproduct. Now, helium is an inert gas. It's happy all by itself. It doesn't actually want to attach to things. Helium actually will bleed out of rock samples. Now, over billions and billions of years, that helium ought to have bled out a long time ago. There's actually still helium in a lot of these samples, and based on helium in its position, it's actually saying something completely different than the decay rate. Now, that's one instance. And then there's actually selenium halo rings. Can get into that. I got some good stuff for you if you want that. I just didn't bring it all in today because I didn't think we'd have enough time to cover it. But there are things there that have given him reason, because I thought the same thing. I'm like, well, when I first saw this, that's why I had to go in and search him out. He's actually got a lot of good stuff and a lot of good reason why he says what he says. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Well, again, it's a perfect example to look at. We had the historical record of it. We look at the Grand Canyon. We've made a bunch of assumptions historically about it, but we have a perfect example of a catastrophic event creating this in a matter of days and weeks. A flood answers that for the Grand Canyon and a lot of things that we see in the rock formations that we see. And that exactly, that's a good point. And that's why I think they use Mount St. Helens. Okay, well, we're only 7 minutes over. Thank you guys for hanging in with me. I appreciate it. And again, if you want to talk to me outside of this and want some more information, come to me. I've got it. I can give you links and get you squared away on that. Okay. Well, we'll end with a prayer, and I'll let you get to lunch. Dear Lord, thank you so much for this day. Thank you for all the many blessings of it. We're so grateful for, again, your creation, being a part of your creation. Lord, I set aside time to study your creation and study things about your creation. Lord, help us to be well prepared for conversations out in the world when we're encountering different people with different beliefs. Help us to be, again, polite but ready to defend our faith and to hopefully bring more souls to you. Lord, we're so grateful for all the things that you've done in our lives. We're so truly blessed. We have so many things to be grateful for. We recognize that you are the benefactor. Lord, I pray that you be with those who are dealing with different ailments and struggles. I pray that you be with them all. I pray again that you be with Jim Kelly and the loss of his son. Be with them during this time of loss. And Lord, I pray that, again, you just be with all of them, anyone struggling with anything. Lord, again, we end this prayer by thanking you most and above all for your son, the sacrifice he gave, and everything that we have in him. We ask this in Jesus' most wonderful and matchless name. Amen.